crimes. Stuff gets delayed because of the privacy that surrounds juvenile court proceedings. You don't even get inside the courtroom unless there's a trial going on or maybe a guilty plea going on. So you don't even see the continuances. And then usually it's going to work out as some kind of a guilty plea, to simplify. Anyway, and then some young attorney, probably 2 years out of law school, is going to come out and say, Mrs. Jones, I got it all fixed. What'd you get? We adjudicated him delinquent, and now he's going to go away to a school, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's usually the experience, right? So I guess you can imagine that that's not quite the same as that eye-to-eye, face-to-face accountability and that level of having the person who's done this crime potentially get put on a better path and do something to make up for what they did. I mean, a lot of victims really want to know that whoever did it to them is not going to do it again. And that is what that restorative process goes to. Juvenile courts are supposed to go there, but they don't necessarily always get there. And they certainly do everything they can to make sure that victims and defendants don't look each other in the eye and don't talk to each other so that there's no understanding. So when we look at the victims, they're happier. And then when we look at the defendants, their recidivism is way lower than the people who went through the traditional juvenile court process. It's not going to be that way in every case. Yes, there will be cases where it doesn't work. There will be cases where the kid doesn't follow through on the contract, or the kid acts out in the process of trying to come to a contract. But I can tell you the results are remarkable there. Almost always there's a contract, almost always the kid follows through, and these studies of, at this point, hundreds of defendants and victims and survivors indicate that they're all better off. That's a good thing. So we would like to do that here, but it's like anything else. It's money, and the smart way to do this is not to put the money into the DA's office. Because what happens then is Krasner gets voted out, hypothetically speaking, until the Hun returns to be our next DA, DA Hun, or DA Attila, and then they decide that yes, we will have this diversion program, but only if you're convicted first. Oh, we're going to convict you first. So the smart process has been to have a nonprofit that's outside the DA's office, and to have some kind of a system where the DA's cases are routed there. It's usually actually a fairly random system where they're routed there so that the nonprofit has some leverage to back away if the district attorney's office tries to go a negative direction with the plan. I think that plan makes a lot of sense. The other thing that's nice about the nonprofit being out there is it's hard for city council to steal your money, right? You don't want to run around and try to provide all these additional services and then have city council come in and say, yeah, well, nice that you got that $5 million grant. We would really like to give more $10,000 tax abatements to people coming in from the counties to buy new homes, so we'll just take that back. So it gets you around that problem too, and that's kind of where we're trying to go.
So Larry.
Was that too long?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Was that too long?
A lot of things,
Yeah, it was
so
too long.
Okay.
It's
too
Thank
long.
you, ma'am.
You are
So I just want Susanna Vangeli to let you know we will pass your message on. So I'm actually going to hand it to you. This is for later.
It's for later?
This is a request. All right. So you saw that, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So and your name is Susanna? Right?
Susanna Vangel.
Susanna.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what it is.
All right. So please take Susanna's advice. All right. Thank you.
Just so this doesn't cause me a lot of trouble later, it appears that Susanna is inquiring about a particular case, which I will take that back to the office and I will get it to the right people so that they can answer your concern about a particular case.
Okay. So you mentioned during your kind of letting us know how the juvenile system is working with your department, but for some reason, people think that I'm like the DA hotline. If something happens, if there's like a press conference, people call me and ask me, what does that mean? So I'm just gonna pass this on to you. So for every person who commits a crime, there's someone on the other end who is the recipient. So there are a lot of things floating about gun violence, and we just recently had a shooting on 52nd Street. So I live in this neighborhood, and I grew up right around there. gun violence is up, and it's around the rates of about 10 years ago, right? Or violent crime, right? No. Okay. So.
I don't want to interrupt your question, but
Okay, no, I want you to address that because people think that there's an uptick. So there is a U.S. Attorney, William M. McSwain, which I'm sure you're aware of. He was appointed by the current occupant of the White House, and he did a press conference a few days ago, right? So I got calls about it. And he's saying that your sentencing is too lenient on violent criminals, and that it's harming minority communities all across the city. And I'm just reading his quotes. People who have the right to be the most outraged by these policies are those in the African American community and the Latino community. So I'm letting you do your public response to, I saw there was a memo, you all write a lot of memos, but on your website, but this is to respond to this DA's contribution to gun violence or violent crime and this lenient sentencing.
all right. So, just so we are all clear, if you go to the Philadelphia Police Department's data on violent crime, which you can do on your phone right now, if you would like to do that, what you will see is that the Philadelphia Police Department collects real-time, by which I mean daily, or at least 5 days a week, real-time information on crime, and they break it down into different categories. On the face page, what you will see is a homicide number, which is done by a particular system. But if you go to the reports for all crime for Philadelphia, you'll see all violent crime, and you'll see all of what they categorize as being nonviolent crime. And what you will actually see, you may not see it in the newspapers, because they don't find it all that exciting. And what you certainly won't hear it from Bill McSwain, an appointee of that person whose name you wouldn't mention, because he finds it factually inconvenient. But what you will actually see is that all violent crime last year was down 5%. Yes, we have a terrible problem with homicides. Yes, we had an increase in shootings, and that is a terrible problem. But it does actually matter that all violent crime, including gunpoint robbery, aggravated assault with a gun, rape, all of it taken together was down 5% last year. The last time I checked this, and you can, if you look at the most recent weekly report, you can see the year to date. You will see this year, once again, violent crime, according to the Philadelphia Police Department, not my opinion, and this is not based on charges, this is based on complaints, this is reports of crime, right? Down 8%. I am very, very sorry to inform my Republican colleague, Bill McSwain, but violent crime is down. It has been down since we came into office. Do I think I did that? No, I don't think I did that. There's an incredibly complex causation of crime, et cetera, et cetera. And we can certainly talk a little bit more about that. But that's the fact. I mean, we can do one of two things. We can live in the la-la land of the newspapers and the la-la land of the history of public perception about crime, which has meant that for 30 years, as crime went down every single year, the public was led to believe, and did believe, at a level of 65% that crime was going up. And if we do that, we will permanently have a terrible criminal justice policy. We will permanently have mass incarceration. Because instead of logic, instead of reason, instead of science, we'll be going, crime is going up. That has worked very, very well for Republicans. They are really good at fear. They know them some fear. And I'm just not going to be part of that. I mean, if I can't trust what the Philadelphia Police Department says about numbers for violent crime, who should I trust? Bill McSwain? Bill McSwain lives in Westchester. Bill McSwain's history in criminal justice is not 30 years of dealing with street crime, which has been my history. His history has been that he was an assistant U.S. attorney for about 3 years, and then he went to a large law firm where he defended white-collar defendants in criminal matters. In other words, Wall Streeters. That is the person who is explaining to us what we need to do in Philadelphia County. That's the one who's talking. Now, the particular case he's talking about, and understand we do 40,000 cases a year, is a case where my office acknowledged, and I acknowledged a long time ago, that a mistake was made, that one of our ADAs, and yes, it's my responsibility, violated policy, didn't go to a supervisor, dealt the case out for less than it was worth. We've said that from day one. That's going to happen. When you're dealing with 40,000 cases, it's going to happen. And the state level of prosecution does 93% of criminal cases. The feds do 7%, right? So it's going to happen. We have owned that as having been a mistake. We have made efforts, including filing a motion to try to fix it. And frankly, when the feds decided on that particular case to go ahead and indict the defendant we had already charged, I was totally fine with that. They can do that. That happens a lot. I have no problem as a legal matter with their doing it. Maybe then the result will be more like what I would have liked to see in the first place, right? But that is not a pattern. It is not reflective of the reality of what we do with sentencing. What we do, in fact, is we don't prosecute people for weed. We're not locking up sex workers anymore. We are dealing out cases at significantly lower levels that are nonviolent, do not involve sex assault, are not being a felon in possession of a firearm, and are not high-dollar, white-collar stuff. That's what we are doing.
Excuse me.
Our charges when it comes to our results when it comes to violent crime, we think are very appropriate. And I mean, let's be honest. It's real simple. McSwain wants to run for something, and he figures that he can get a lot of attention. He can elevate his profile if he gets into a fist fight with me. So that's just what it is. Let's just call it what it is. So that's fine. He can do that. The person who selected him for office is going to be in office about another 21 months.
That's it.
And then he's going to be voted out in one of the biggest landslides in American history.
Yes.
And, Mr. McSwain and his ilk are going to run around trying to play a politics of fear. They're going to try to pit the counties against the cities and rural areas against the cities. And it is what it is. It is not scientific or accurate as to what my office is doing. And we all got to stick with the facts. We got to stick with science. Because if we're simply going to stick with the latest terrible tragedy, and yes, in a big city, there will be terrible tragedies, then we're going to be where we started, with mass incarceration and, frankly, bankrupt public schools.
Excuse me, sir. I gave you a question. Are you aware that I've been trying to reach you regarding, I didn't want you to go in details for Robert Petrone, for the case. I just had a question for you. Is anybody in your office been telling you that I've been trying to speak with you about this DA?
So I am not going to talk about individual cases. I don't talk about open cases in forums like this. You gave me a card which says you would like to have contact about Mr. Petrone, and I will have the appropriate person do it. In an office of 40,000 cases, some cases come to my attention. Frankly, a lot more than my predecessors, but not all cases come to my attention.
Sir, do you remember me? Do you remember me? There was November, I believe there was a day before you got elected around Kensington. I was there with a bunch of people and I spoke regarding former Bell Commissioner's daughter that is being accused in my son. Do you remember that, sir? It's been...
Mrs. Vangelli,
Yes.
there are a lot of people here who came
Yes.
to listen to this forum.
Yes.
I'm going to address your concern, but I'm not going to turn this forum into your concern.
No, I don't want you to turn this forum here in my concern. I just want justice, okay? I just been trying to speak with you about this Robert Petrone that not too long ago he filed lies in your office, and he's not supposed to be there, right, to be working. My son don't deserve to be in jail, okay? This Robert Petrone, we've been paying too much money for our son not to be in jail, okay? And this Robert Petrone still in your office and playing games there. That's what it is all about. We really respect you, and my son wrote a letter from prison to you not too long ago. I electronically forward that to you, and nobody from your office is trying, to give any information to you directly. They just keep playing there in your office, sir.
Can I make a suggestion? Can you speak to her after this forum?
I will have someone from my office get back to her after
No,
this
please.
forum.
I've been waiting.
But, it would help, actually, if I had your contact information on this card.
Please.
Instead of this sort of very
You know
general
how
information.
long I've been trying to speak with your office there? More than a year, sir. They've been ignoring me. They don't care.
Well, I don't actually know if they've been ignoring you, but if you'll give me the contact information, I can find out.
I will.
Thank you.
So we know that there are probably other people here who have open cases or issues with the DA's office. There are staffers here, and if you could, is there any particular staffer here that can hand things to? Okay, so will you be here a couple of minutes?
I'll be happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, but we cannot take those kind of questions in an open forum. because-
Please, we spend so much time, being in Larry Krasner's campaign. We deserve to have, to be heard.
That's right.
So,
Don't shut me out because it's been more than a year now. That I've been trying to speak with Mr. Krasner, and nobody pays attention about that. I'm not talking here about details. I don't want Mr. Krasner go into details,
Right.
okay? Because I hired lawyers,
right.
for that.
We hear you, and you heard her, Larry, right? So, the next thing we want to talk about is there's actually a question, and I believe it's from Brother Phil. And the question is, basically, we've been advised to hold on to our properties. But how can we when drug dealing, gentrification, trash dumping, loud music, basically a lot of nuisance things are happening, and the crimes have been changed to nuisance violations. And and 911 doesn't respond to these calls anymore, and the drug dealers can take control of your block. So with that kind of question, because a lot of people, those are like a lot of the issues going on in communities, what kind of role can the DA's office play when there are multiple issues happening on the block, say with drug dealing? I lived on a very small block in West Philly. Everybody knew who the drug dealers were. And it's just like the cops would just roll through the streets sometimes. So from the DA's perspective, where do you come in the process if something like that is happening?
So it's a great question, but it gets to the frustration I think a lot of people have. They don't necessarily know who does what, right? So in terms of active police officers in the city of Philadelphia, right now you're looking at more than 6,000. In terms of the number of people who are sworn law enforcement in the DA's office, it's on the order of 60. So it's actually less. So we have essentially 1%. While we do engage in some serious narcotics investigations, in fact, we had a very, very successful investigation this year where we tried to get at high-level and mid-level drug dealers rather than just, frankly, sweeping up a bunch of 15-year-olds on the corner, which is what they used to do. While we do that, the reality is if you pick up 911, you're not calling the DA's office. You are calling the Philadelphia Police Department. I don't control them. I cannot speak for them. I happen to like our commissioner, and I think that his heart is genuinely in the right place. But what is done there in terms of a report about drug activity is not within the DA's control. When it does rise to the level, for example, of what we saw at Kip and Cambria this year, where we were able to carry out a multi-month wiretap type investigation, we can do some remarkable things. There was a drug organization that was rooted in that location for more than 10 years, perhaps up to 20 years. And we were able to get all of the leadership and all of the mid-level drug dealers who were involved in that organization. We arrested about 67 people and certainly changed the character of that block, at least until something else moved in. But honestly, they were so entrenched, nothing else moved in right away. And there has been a change in that location. But, I'm just going to be honest with you. We don't have the resources to do that on every single drug corner in the city of Philadelphia. It's triage. We have to do what we can with the resources that are available and go after some of the really bad stuff. And so there are going to be, we're not going to end drug trafficking completely in this administration. God knows that the last 30 years of really draconian tactics didn't end it. God knows that locking up generations of young men didn't end it. But my office is very serious about going after high-level and mid-level drug dealers. When we are speaking more generally about nuisance-type situations, if you call the police department and you say, Whatever, they're playing music too loud on my block, which is something I did when I lived in Mount Airy. I think we all know that it's a triage. If it's a call about someone firing a gun on the block, there's gonna be sirens coming from multiple directions. If it's a call about someone who's a persistent pain in the butt, who is, playing the music way too loud, they might show up on a sleepy Saturday, or they might not. And I'm not saying that to be critical of the police department. They have limited resources too. But it's in the nature of what they do. I'm not excusing it. I'm also telling you that that's not what I do. I don't control the police department. I would never presume to do that. They have a big job. They're going to try to do what they can, and they're not going to be able to do everything. I do think this question, though, gets at a much more fundamental point. It's a real point, and I've lived in the city continuously for 30 years. We have had efforts to completely eliminate things that are irritating. We have them in Ferguson. We've had those efforts in New York. It's called broken windows. And basically, it's a real hardcore clamping down on little stuff. Turnstile jumping. In Ferguson, it was people who let the grass grow too long, that kind of stuff. And we didn't end up in a good place. Where we ended up is with a whole lot of poor people being hit with a whole lot of fines and violations and this, that, and the other thing. We ended up with illegal stop and frisk being rampant and actually tearing apart communities. The reality of urban existence is that we're not going to be able to stop everything that is annoying. But I have to tell you, I honestly think the better route to stopping more of what is annoying is not to expect everything to be fixed by the police. It is to put our money into education, into building up communities, into things that make it possible for families to remain together. And one of the things that does that is not putting people in jail for stuff they didn't need to go to jail for.
That's right.
I don't have any remedy for all of it, but I know this, that the clamp down method of dealing with these types of issues that we saw in New York and that we have seen in Ferguson does more harm than good.
There are a couple of questions about the police. And one is, they actually both about the same thing, about the police contract. Does the DA actually have any input into that, or is that just between the police and the mayor?
Boy, I wish. So the answer is that it's a contract between the city of Philadelphia. The DA's office is not involved in that process. I can tell you that when the last contract was signed, it was pretty clear I was going to be the DA, but I was not the DA yet. And I did try to have conversations both with the city solicitor, who is the head of sort of the civil side of law for the city and is involved in negotiating that contract, and also with the mayor. And my comments were directed at the thing that I think is most crucial, which is we cannot have a system where when police officers are fired or they are disciplined by the commissioner, they go to an arbitration that is a fix.
Act 101.
Right, and that's what we have. We have arbitrators who don't get in the room unless the FOP says they're good. So why do you think so many disciplines get overturned? Why do you think so many terminations get reversed? We've placed our police commissioner in a position, and this is a commissioner who believes in integrity, in my opinion. We've placed our police commissioner in a position where politics is going to reverse what he tries to do in order to, lift up the best officers and knock down the worst ones. That's a real issue. I would like to think that our next contract is going to be negotiated so that we have arbitrators who are even-handed, so that we return the capacity to fire and to discipline to the police commissioner. And I think that would make a really big difference. It is possible that I'll have a little bit more say, simply from the perspective of a bully pulpit, when the next contract is negotiated. I will say this, I also tried to suggest, what are you doing a 3-year for? Can't you just do a 2-year? I realized I had sort of like zero authority as the incoming DA who wasn't in yet, right? Can't we just go with like 2 years so that in 2 years we can revisit this? And there was a whole lot of, how shall I put it, paper shuffling, and we ended up with a 3-year contract. So, something has to be done about this. It's not just a problem in Philly, it's a problem in other cities, but it's a really, really, really big problem. When you see someone acquitted down at 6th and Market, where they don't indict many police officers, you see somebody acquitted down there after a month-long trial for police corruption, and he is promoted a week later in a ceremony specially arranged to occur in City Hall, which is not how it's usually done. That should tell you something about what's going on and what needs to change.
Act 101. I asked that question. I just wanted to follow up, and I hate to go against that. Do we have anything that's going to follow up on Act 101 from your office as far as advocacy?
I hate to say this, but a life full of numbers and names, I am losing track. Act 101?
Act 101 deals with what you were just talking about, the arbitrators and how they're chosen. So what we're saying is at that point, it has to go from, at the state level, they have to change that act in order to make it much more easy for the auditor, the arbitrators to be chosen. So you don't have the FOP choosing basically 2 arbiters out of 3.
Right. So this was proposed legislation.
No, it's already there. We just have to. What we have to do is we have to advocate to our state representatives that they change that law to make it easier that you would have only one vote, maybe another third vote come from somewhere
All right,
else.
so this is a proposed modification.
Correct.
To the legislation that would get at the point I was getting at, which is that we need to have arbitrators who are actually fair. There has to be due process. The whole thing can't.
So
be
can your
closed.
office start the process of maybe advocating for that?
Oh, I'm advocating for it right now, and I'll be happy to do more around that. If there are opportunities for me to advocate more about it, I'm there.
Okay.
That-
Is there
that's
someone,
not hard.
and I can ask you, I'm sorry, Emma.
No.
I'll
because
respect that.
You're my friend.
I'll
and
respect
you owe me
that.
dinner over that one. So, okay.
But I do support it. I think that, I'd have to look at the text, but I completely support the idea.
But submit a card.
It was on my card.
Another card. Because it just said Act 101, so submit your follow-up question.
So we have another question about officers and related to gun use. References a shooting that took place at 49th and Hazleton, where an officer did not have on body cams. The question, without getting into details of the particular case, says, shouldn't the wearing of body cams by officers be something that's under the jurisdiction of a DA if it's not occurring as it should?
So, once again, I can't get into specifics of that particular situation, although we do, we look at a lot of officer-involved shootings every year, and we make decisions on an individual basis about them. The wearing of body cams is a matter of policy of the police department. I see them more and more, and I understand that we're getting to the point where the mayor's budget, if I heard him correctly the other day, is proposing essentially getting to the point where we have body cams for everybody who's interacting with the public. I think that's a great idea. I think it is great in terms of the district attorney's office knowing what the truth is about an incident. I think it's great for making police officers safer, because if they are dealing with someone who is, for example, intoxicated and aggressive, that person may look at the body cam and say, oh, yeah, maybe I don't want to push this officer. Maybe I don't want to take a swing and escalate things. So I think it's good in that respect. It's not within our jurisdiction to make it happen. It's not within our jurisdiction to write the rules, although we do advise on these things. But it is within our jurisdiction when we evaluate a situation to note what's on the body cam, or to note if somehow it magically was not turned on. Those kinds of things, in some instances, can happen in an innocent way. There are technological aspects to it, but we're not naive. We're well aware that there have been occasions of police officers, doing a drug search with the cam off, rearranging things to justify the search, and then coming back with the cam on and play acting that it was on the first time. We are aware that there have been instances of, police officers deciding when to turn it on and when to turn it off. And allegations about things happening before or after, or then of course there's always the possibility that they recorded something you didn't like and you try to find a way to make sure that it's never turned over. I mean, again, I can't talk about individual cases. So it is within our jurisdiction to decide whether we think that a prosecution is on all fours, it's fair, it's straightforward, and we are always extremely interested in the video or what it means if it is lacking, and it does affect our decisions.
One last question. Homicides and rapes, etc., are not the only forms of violent crimes. White-collar crime is equally as violent, ripping apart our society and families. What are your policies around white-collar crime in office?
So it's, I can't actually agree that it's violent, because that's just not the way the word is used in criminal justice. I agree it's incredibly harmful. And there's an awful lot of people who, when we had the Wall Street crash, should have ended up in jail, and they should have ended up in jail for a very long time. There has been a really unacceptable level of favoritism for, let's be candid, rich, almost always white people getting away with doing things that have resulted in all kinds of foreclosures and devastation of people's wealth and incomes. It's pretty terrible stuff, and I've always thought that it should have been treated much more seriously than it was. I would remind you, by the way, this is the kind of law that Mr. McSwain did before he decided he was a prosecutor. So it's the real deal. The tradition in the DA's office hasn't been a perfect tradition. The insurance companies, for example, will give a large grant to the DA's office, and as you might expect, to some extent that meant that they had the capacity to call when they felt that there was insurance fraud of some sort, and to direct and focus the energy towards the concerns that they had. All right, I'm not saying that they were pointing out innocent people to have them prosecuted. I'm saying that they were doing things that were in their economic best interest, and that was more likely to go after a phony plaintiff with a phony car accident than it was, why don't you focus on Wall Street? Why don't you focus on financial improprieties happening within the insurance industry? Oh, I'm going to tell you for sure that's not quite what they had in mind. So we came in with the sense that our economic crimes unit should try to go a different direction. Now, traditionally, the big dollar economic crime stuff has been done by the feds, and specifically, an awful lot of it has been done in the Southern District of New York, which is a federal jurisdiction, because that's where you have the heart of the financial industry. I mean, one of the reasons that New York prosecutors are swimming in money is that the big-time prosecution for white-collar crime has occurred up there. There is no way to turn the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, for jurisdictional reasons, among others, into the most important location for the prosecution of white-collar crime. But there is a way not to have your economic crimes unit focused on simply serving the interest of the insurance industry. It should be an economic crimes unit that is looking out, number one, for poor people and for vulnerable victims. So when you have elderly people who are getting ripped off in different kinds of scams, whether it's the telephone scam claiming that your grandson has been in a car accident and he's locked up in a jail cell in the South, and you need to send me $2,500 right now so I can get him out of jail, which goes on all the time, by the way. It was also pulled on my father-in-law, almost successfully, because he was getting up in years and cares about his grandkids. Somebody should be going after that, even if it's not exactly what the insurance industry would emphasize. When people show up to do contractor type work and they run off with Mrs. Jones's deposit, $12,000, and they never come back with the materials, and they never come back and do the work, that is terrible. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, if we can get a hold of it, that to me is really serious. So there is a level of consumer fraud and picking on vulnerable victims, picking on poor people, that I really want to go after. I think you've already seen that we've had a couple of serious prosecutions of house thieves. Ain't nobody picking on more vulnerable victims than house thieves. We just had an arrest the other day. We had one several weeks before. It's a problem that has not been addressed for many, many years. And I mean, this is really true. It was the policy of Seth Williams that he would not go after house thieves unless they were on house number 20. You can all take a deep breath now, because we actually go after people for one candy bar and stealing one car, but for whatever reason, Mr. Williams was not interested in that, and it allowed a problem to fester, and then it created, frankly, more and more house thieves. Well, thank goodness we're going a slightly different direction now. We didn't do it overnight, because these are investigations that take a while, but we want to do that. And when it comes to other forms of white-collar fraud, I'm well aware that this is a system that picks on poor people. There is no reason why people engaging in white-collar fraud, if it comes to our attention, if we can find it, shouldn't be prosecuted by my office. There's no reason why it should always be, the lowest level contractor being blamed for the building collapse, when if a little bit of serious research might show that the same developer has pulled the same tricks in 15 other houses that just didn't fall in yet. And I am not speaking about a particular case, but we have to be able to come to this in a pretty even-handed way.
This was my question.
Well, okay, I really appreciate that you all want to, but we've got like 30 questions up here. So can you
But there was
can you do a,
part of the
excuse me,
question
ma'am?
that said about politicians and people who are in office, which was written on the question and not read. And that was part of the question about politicians and elected individuals also who are.
Oh, okay, so we'll read that part of your
I'm
question.
sorry. You probably can't read it, the handwriting.
We're struggling a little here with the handwriting.
I'm not gonna tell any of you who, but I just want you to know that it's always a pleasure for me when I come into a room where I see some of my ex-protester clients.
Very good.
Number one, because they are not in custody.
That's right.
Number two, because I love free speech.
Okay, so this is our interpretation.
This is interpretation. You can correct me. I'm trying to read it, but it's a little difficult. I think the specific question is, what are you doing when the committers of white collar crime are elected officials?
Yeah, that was part of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the question.
So there are certain rules around grand jury secrecy, which say I can't talk about whether there is or is not a grand jury, and I can't talk about any information that is going through a grand jury or is not going through a grand jury. This, in some instances, may limit my ability to speak. I can tell you that I've been in Philly a while, and so when I received a check from a certain political and union official who is now federally indicted, who decided to donate to my campaign in the 11th hour, I returned it because I would like to stay in a position where nobody can say that I am unable to investigate, I am unable to charge. I mean, I actually have made a decision that, with the exception of possibly the mayor, I just haven't made any endorsements, even though good friends of mine, people I respect, like Movita Johnson Harrell, who actually was just here and is running now. Or, I mean, to be honest with you, also, one of her opponents, Pastor Pam, who I think is pretty great. Even when there are people I know and I like and I respect, I try not to endorse, because the consequence of the endorsement is you get so politically balled up that now I could neither, people would argue I could neither investigate her nor could I investigate any of her opponents, because I would have, picked a side. So we're trying to stay in a position where we have the agility to be able to pursue this, and I'm not at liberty to speak specifically about any particular investigation that may or may not be going on.
Okay, so we're gonna switch from like white collar crime to the death penalty. So, this is a tricky subject for a lot of people, because a lot of families believe, particularly maybe how the crime occurred, that they want to see maximum penalty. And you ran on that you would not seek the death penalty. So, can family members have some say in the sentencing when someone who would, under other administrations, be eligible for the death penalty are given a different type of sentence?
Okay, so great question, like all of them. Man, there's a lot I could say about this. Let me start with the basics, though. During this administration, we have not sought the death penalty. We have not filed a notice that we intend to seek the death penalty in any